welcome to Thinking with the Stars. I'm your host, Soul Cancer. Today we're going to be talking about 5 interviews that Jeffrey Mishlove had put out on his new Thinking Aloud channel. And the 5 interviews were conducted on 3 separate occasions with 3 different individuals. And these interviews happened when Dr. Mishlove was talking with people during aspects of Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury, the planet, was square to Jupiter, the other planet, and so what that means is the Earth is making a right angle with Mercury and Jupiter somewhere up there in the sky, in the zodiac. So on the 11th of August 2018, Jeffrey spoke with Bruce Zen Benefiel, and Zen, as he goes by Zen, he was talking, he had 2 interviews. One was called The Sociology of UFOlogy, and the second one was called A New World Order. And so these interviews happened at the time. Mercury was in Leo, in the 12th house, so you would see our thoughts would be taking charge there. And it was squared to Jupiter, that was in Scorpio. So we're talking about regeneration of our knowledge, maybe ancient knowledge, tapping into ancient knowledge. Mercury was in the 12th house with the Palladian system, as well as Jupiter was in the 3rd house. On the 11th of April 2019, again we had Mercury making a square with Jupiter in the zodiac. Mercury at the time, Dr. Mishlove was speaking with Lloyd Auerbach, and the interview was about psychokinesis. And at the time, Mercury was in Pisces, so we'd be thinking about how our thoughts were kind of global, like specifically it comes up the relationship between matter and energy, say for instance. So Pisces is a sign to me that represents how matter's dispersed across the universe. And so that planet was square with Jupiter, that was in Sagittarius. So Jupiter's at home in Sagittarius. So it's a very ordered, representing ordered knowledge and a way of knowing things that makes sense. Mercury was in the 1st house for the Palladian system, and in the 9th, Jupiter was in the 9th house for the Palladian system. Or maybe I'm saying that wrong, Palladian. And then the 3rd instance of Mercury being square with Jupiter and Jeffrey conducting an interview that I know of was when we're talking about implications for the near-death experience. And we were talking about that. Jeffrey was talking about that with our good friend Peter B. Todd. And so they also did another interview called Theology for the Third Millennium. And Mercury was in Virgo during this interview. It was squared to Jupiter, that was in Sagittarius, again still at home in Sagittarius. It wasn't much later, it was 6th of September 2019, so only a few months later. Right, so there we would expect to be thinking about the healing power of thoughts with Mercury and Virgo, okay? And again, a very coming square, so to me, like a square aspect is not entirely favorable. Usually it's kind of too double-sided. So I'm going to talk about what we can glean, what kind of story we can tell with these 3 aspects taking place. Now, of course, I'm unprepared right now. I'm trying to remember when was Mercury square to Jupiter recently, because I'm trying to do these sequentially, but of course I'm falling behind. So just a quick look. May 3rd, 2021. Mercury Squared Jupiter. So I don't know if that's... So yeah, I guess I am on track here. At any rate, Bruce Zen Benefiel, he's kind of the hero of our story, as we'll take it. He's meandering along, and he's thinking that we ought to find our true purpose in life. It's not really too much to ask. We're kind of feel like we're getting bogged down in routine and stumbling along, not really making it anywhere. And we want to. He says, harmony in the planet among its inhabitants, and looking for unity. So harmony, unity between all man and women. Obviously, not too much to ask. He says it's kind of our inner nature, our deeper inner nature. So we need to, if we can tap into kind of like that, go inward and discover ourselves, that this is going to help facilitate us getting together, get everyone getting on the same page. It's a real kind of mystical, ideal way of thinking about things, and he's our hero of our story. So one thing he's talking about is that man had never faced before an existential threat, okay? And I think something like an existential threat to humanity, I think that's quite... I think the problem with it is like the Jupiter, the Sagittarius aspect is we're never quite taking it seriously. Okay, we're going to take it seriously when humans become extinct. And then we'll say, okay, that was a credible threat. Yeah, we missed it, but and that's kind of the scientific scientism. Okay. Or say deductive reasoning. Well, I can't say for sure that something's an existential threat until it wipes us out, and then it's trial and error. It's how we do science, right? If we can't experiment, well, what kind of experiment can we do where we experiment trying to wipe out humanity? Does it work? Now he compares humanity to other primates. So when it's other primates, okay, they form tribes, they fight each other, they sling mud at each other, and so on. And it seems to us like even the George Washington quote that I had seen the other day, where he's saying, the best defense against somebody, or the best defense against people taking our freedom, is to arm ourselves where we're unable to, where so no one's able to take our freedom away because we're armed to the teeth, right? So, and that's human nature. And basically what that comes down to, as Zen points out, it comes down to the fear that lurks within us, okay? So I know we have been speaking about earlier, previous episodes, we have been speaking about sacrifices, and that we worried that if we have made sacrifices in order to cooperate with other people, that they're going to turn around and take advantage of us, okay? So this is kind of the rationalization of our fear, is that we're not going to get a fair exchange for our efforts. Almost like what's kind of holding back socialism, for instance, would be, say, look, I'm this entrepreneur. I am more ingenious than other people. I can do all this stuff. And some slug sitting on his couch all day, he's gonna be getting the same as me. It's not fair. I'm afraid people aren't going to be putting in the same amount of effort that I'm putting in. So how is that right? and I mean it's something that's holding us back. Lloyd Auerbach, he offers a suggestion to amend this flaw in human nature. And he says that we can squash the rebellion by bringing the opposition to their knees using our superior powers of mental acuity. Okay, and we give a few examples here. There are signs that metal, the shape of metal, could be altered psychokinetically, and when metal the shape of metal was altered psychokinetically and it's inspected under a microscope, you can see the boundaries in the crystalline structure that would touch each other, as though heat were applied, even though there was no heat applied. Another example is we have these computer programs. There's lots of reports of computer programs crashing when certain users just aren't tech savvy, or in a rotten mood, and I'm in a rotten mood for some reason, and my technology doesn't work correctly. And that's not how technology is supposed to work. It's supposed to be following this kind of flow of data, and we're not going to have an unexpected crash of the system just because the user's mood or the user can't get along. But it supposedly it tends to happen, or is reported to happen. So witness inhibition and ownership resistance were sort of the two barriers that, if we could get past those, we could see how electrostatic and magnetic forces could be harnessed by the mind and cause physical effects. Several witnesses had observed the physical effects of electromagnetic forces generated by the mind at a distance. They're giving examples of the kind of home field advantage for the fans during sporting events, how it can cause fumbles, and it turns these matches into a battle of wills. Okay, and so that's kind of going back to primates, how primates like to pick sides and cause fights, and we like to do the same thing. It's good for business. So now I feel like I'm mischaracterizing Zen and Lloyd Auerbach. I'm mischaracterizing their positions on purpose. Not so much Bruce. I mean, he's the hero of our story. Lloyd Auerbach is talking about psychokinesis, and I don't think I'm being fair. He warns about the dangers of angrily using psychokinesis. What it is it's a matter of anger clouds our judgment, and we end up getting in our own way, and it doesn't work as well as what he calls psychokinesis works better in a silly environment where people don't seem to be really caring as much, and it's just for fun. And that's because the what was it called? The witness. Excuse me. Witness inhibition and ownership resistance. So it seems like the barriers that the mind puts up prevent psychokinesis from happening more than facilitate psychokinesis in a negative way. And Bruce, Zen, he recognized that we learned from tough experiences, and that through repetition they typically became positives. So energy was the sort of thing that we had to work with in a flow, and as Lloyd Auerbach put it, we have to learn how to get out of our own way. Zen's recommendation is that we observe, we become more aware, we listen without putting identifiers on things. So that especially that principle of being non-judgmental is how we're going to make progress in the endeavor. So while Bruce emphasized the psychospiritual aspect, and Lloyd Auerbach emphasizes the power of the mind to create physical effects, then we have Peter B. Todd, and he's referring to this as the psychophysical problem. His main theory that he's working with is dual aspect monism. So there's epistemic and ontological relationship between mind and matter, and so that's the dual aspect, is we have mind and we have matter, two aspects, and the monism part is he's saying that this brings about some holiness, some divinization, and so he's tapping into that, the spiritual aspect, as saying when this relationship is understood between mind and matter, that we become holy. I think that characterizes his position quite well, saying that. So for evidence for this, he's saying that quantum computers, they can solve problems at a molecular level, and so it's impossible to take consciousness out of the quantum equation. Now there's a few quotes he gives. It's consciousness was the late-born offspring of the unconscious soul and the mirror of the universe that had evolved to look upon itself. The mirror of the universe had evolved to look upon itself. That's what they considered consciousness to be. Carl Jung, he had a notion it was unus mundus, and that's what emerged from the synergy between the collective unconsciousness on one hand and quantum non-locality on the other hand. So here we're able to, or at least Peter Todd, he thinks of it as the restoring holiness in our time. He uses a term theogenesis, and this was divinization of the world and the cosmos. So he's coming from where there's a disenchantment with traditional theism, and a new theology would embrace the convergence of mind and matter because they were irreducible to each other. And so I think that there is where the theory has a hard time, because we have discovered that mind and matter are irreducible to one another. An example that they're giving is the theory of evolution. Teilhard de Chardin, for instance, he was silenced by the Roman Catholic Church prior to the Vatican II. But ever since the Council of Trent, there's been a schism between science and religion. So Carl Jung's handling this. He's saying that the archetype of God and God itself are indistinguishable. And this is what's known as the unconscious imago Dei. The upshot here is we're in the process of co-evolving with God. It's what Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere, which is a movement as we're all moving towards the divine. We're celebrants in co-creation with God. God was immanent, transcendent, and mystics East and West were describing the same thing. So mapping out the beyond was the conjunctio positorium, and it seemed like where Peter Todd's what he called the actual death experience, this is where he was able to conquer his fears. So particularly fear of death was the kind of the one that when you have a near-death experience or an actual death experience, as they call it, that you're no longer afraid of death. So same with the how the psychokinesis requires an enhanced awareness as well. It seems like the way, like consciousness, so we're talking about mind and matter are dual aspects, but it does seem like consciousness, which is a property of mind, therefore previously considered to be a property of mind, is a product of the physical material, like we were talking about in the Ork-Or theory of consciousness. That this is where consciousness comes from, is from the quantum non-locality. So really the distinction really dissolves. Now, where it's saved is the fact that it's possible for us to imagine infinity. So matter is a finite entity, but yet this consciousness that we have allows us to imagine, using our minds to imagine things that are greater than material. So that's what really saves it and kind of gives it its buoyancy. So then the discussion here, talking about dual aspect monism and saying a few different things. For instance, we had talked about the importance of having a positive feedback loop. So having a positive feedback loop as an individual, it is that almost like maybe it's that right brain, left brain side. Okay, so right brain, we're talking about the more material side, like a computer, okay, where I'm able to think about things in a rational, logical manner, make choices based on that. And then my left side of the brain is my creative and what we'd almost call like heart consciousness, higher self. And so in order to have a positive feedback loop, there's an interaction going on where I'm assessing myself. And I'm saying, okay, I used my brain on that one, and it was successful. Great, way to go. I'm a good android. Other times I used my brain on that one, and I really didn't turn out that well. And deep down, maybe on my left brain, I should have realized that yes, I could have took a different course of action. Maybe it wasn't logically dictated, but emotionally and with my feelings, I need to be able to be more intuitive and tap in. And then other times, I am intuitive and I tap into that emotional side and I do what I feel is right, and logically, comes back, and it wasn't the right choice. There's some fallout. Maybe the fallout's worth it, right? So we're having this continuous sort of self-assessment, and this here, is as much as dual aspect monism can be deconstructed, and I think it can be, it's also important maybe on a level of where what I think would be like cosmic consciousness that Zen is talking about, saying perchance it's a product of these quantum consciousnesses. So the human body, it seems, like taking into account reincarnation stories, that what our bodies do is they kind of draw in consciousness from outside. I think that's safe to say. As we're growing up, we're pulling in consciousness from outside, and we're developing like a psyche, I guess you would call it, or a self. And then whether this, so that's it. And so the psyche in itself, oh, it's spiritual and it's emotional and all that stuff. And it was like, okay, it may well be, right? But excuse me, take a sip here. Right, the cosmic consciousness. I mean, if I'm doing that and everyone else is doing that, then there's going to be like billions of these things out on Earth, first off, and who knows what kind of intelligences are even in outer space, right? So that's kind of like saying, oh, it's like your emotional side and your intuitive side. Well, maybe it's the same as your logical side. It's just from people who have a lot more experience than us, and we're picking up, oh, I'm having an emotion, I'm having a feeling. But it's really, I'm just picking up on the logical intelligence of somebody who's just been through way more experiences than I have, so this is how it reduces. Doesn't mean that I don't need to have a positive feedback loop myself, and that I'm not going to benefit from having a positive feedback loop. And I guess the other deconstruction thing we can touch on quickly to close is the idea that dualities of any kind, because we're fond of saying, yes, we have our duality here, and it gives us a middle way. When we put the two dualities together, it gives us a middle way, is that it's not part of deductive reasoning. So I think that's going back and saying, going back to the scientism and saying, oh, we're not going to know a viable existential threat to humanity until it ends up killing us. And so that would be, we worship deductive reasoning. Everything's got to be logical, precise. We're so intelligent. And but I think for inductive reasoning and evaluating duality, it's neither nor duality, and it's not either or duality. So I mean, I think we can show either or duality to be invalid, but the neither nor duality, I don't think it is. I think it does have uses, and I think what we can say about statements of duality is that statements of duality that use inductive reasoning is to say, okay, that's fine, they're not scientific theories, and so what? It might have a sentiment, where it might have a sentiment towards like these environmental causes, and say, well, it's not a scientific theory. I'm not claiming it's a scientific theory. I'm just saying we'd be better off if we behave this way. So that's going to bring my story to a close. Hope there's anything else I could do. Let me know, and I appreciate it. And thanks so much. Have a good day.